So today I'm going to talk about Enneagram type 5 and its movement towards Enneagram type 7 and Enneagram type 8. So this movement is via the internal lines of connection. So they're lines inside the Enneagram. And you can see that Enneagram 5 is connected by two lines internally within the circle of the Enneagram from the 5 to the 7 and the 5 to the 8. So these internal lines of connection mean that sometimes the Enneagram 5 behaves like Enneagram type 8 or is motivated similarly to an Enneagram type 8, and sometimes the Enneagram 5 behaves like an Enneagram type 7 and is motivated in a similar way to the Enneagram type 7. So some people believe that the movement from the 5 to the 7 is actually a movement of negativity, disintegration, stress. So a negative movement, they're going from one place to a worse place, or worse behavior, or worse motivation. And these people also believe that the movement from the 5 to the 8 is a movement of positivity, integration, growth. So they're improving somehow when they move from the 5 to the 8. That's not correct precisely. It is possible for the 5 to move to the 7 out of stress and growth, and it's possible for 5 to move to 8 out of stress and growth, and it's possible for the 5 to move to 7 and 8 out of neither stress nor growth, out of just bounded rationality, circumstance, other neutral kind of reasons, or totally different reasons. Like bounded rationality is totally different from either being positive, negative, or neutral. It just means that one can only choose what they can see. You have limited options. If you don't know that you have these other options, if you only think you have a certain amount of options, you can only choose those limited options as bounded rationality. And yeah, circumstance, that's not necessarily positive or negative or neutral. So I can see why many people would regard the movement to 7 as often being a negative movement when you go from 5 to 7, and from 5 to 8. I can see why they could see that as often being positive. At a surface kind of a level, it could seem like that, but yeah, I'm just going to talk about generally how that's seen, how it's seen, and how it's seen, and how how it actually is, like whether it actually is positive, whether it is seen to be positive. So, for example, like we have this idea of the 5 as, well, many people have an idea of the 5 as very withdrawn, uninvolved in that reticent type of way. So reticent, it's like when you don't reveal a lot about yourself. So, a 5 might go to social events, but so they're there. It's not like they're not coming, but they're there, and but they won't say a lot. That's often the case. Or if people are given their opinions, they often won't give an opinion. They're often known as the observer. They want to watch others, but they don't want to be involved. And they like a lot of alone time, often getting overwhelmed and withdrawing. So the 7 is often seen as sort of superficial, wanting to try a lot of new things, doesn't want to commit to anything, wants to enjoy themselves, not be involved in something very weighty, in a sort of unless it was somehow enjoyable and weighty. Yeah. So The 8 is seen as sort of brash and says their opinion, has strong opinions. So you could see how if someone's kind of reticent and withdrawn, how some would think them becoming more outspoken like an 8, the 8's known for being more outspoken, would be a good thing. Saying their opinion, they'd think, oh, that's a good thing because this person doesn't normally say anything. And you can see how that could be seen as a positive growth. And you could see how they could look at the 5 acting like a 7 and just being more superficial, sort of doing silly things, less serious things, rather than it's studious. Often the 5 sort of seen as sort of studious or involved in something that sort of takes a lot of concentration. And they see that movement towards more frivolous activity, maybe as a 7 thing, and they think, oh, that seems negative. So that kind of explains why there's that notion of the movement being a negative movement when the 5 moves to the 7 and a positive movement when the 5 moves to the 8. But in reality, it's just how we see these types. Like, we could explain the 7 as being a type that really likes to explore, and that seems positive, like likes to explore, open-minded in that they like to try things, new things. So they're open-minded, they're exploring, adventurous, going out of their comfort zone. These kind of positive concepts of the 7, when the 5 will move to them, and those are movements of the 5 along the lines of internal connection to the 7, when it is more outgoing, less withdrawn, more sort of adventurous, open-minded, trying new things. This is a form of positive growth that the 5 does as it behaves more like a 7. Yeah, and so it goes the same for the movement from the 5 to the 8. There's a negative style of movement because I had just before explained how some people see it as a movement positive when they move to the 8, the 5 moves to 8. But it can be a negative movement, right? Like, they can become just more angry, and that's usually seen in a negative light. Actually, anger can be a positive emotion in particular situations, but often it's seen as negative. And I guess I'm just trying to show you that that these things are not necessarily positive and negative, but the movement is still happening. The 5 is still moving towards the 7, it's still moving towards the 8. The 5 will often have outbursts, these like an angry outburst, which is an inappropriate thing. Like, the word outburst it's an inappropriate normally, or I mean, it can sometimes be positive to have an outburst, but that's a negative movement from the 5 to the 8. But yeah, so the real importance is to see that the 5 does move to the 7, and it does move to the 8 quite easily in terms relative to its movement towards other Enneagram types. And so that's why there's these internal lines of connections, just because the fact is the 5 sometimes behaves or seems or has the motivations of a 7 or an 8. Yeah. And the reason for that is, a lot of the reason for it is this idea of balance, and how a personality type is by definition an imbalance. Now, this is a bit more towards, I haven't heard other people speak about this. Maybe this is my idea, maybe this is my theory on how it works, or how personalities, or one way in which personalities work. Maybe other people have spoken about this, but I haven't come across it yet. But anyway, there's this, an imbalance is what a personality is. And in order to balance oneself, one often moves to the opposite. Because if you're imbalanced this way, and that's what a personality is, an imbalance. So if you're balanced one way, you've got to overcompensate this way to get to balance, because otherwise it's like this, right? Because you're overbalanced this way, and to get back into that sort of central balance, you need something on the other side to become balanced. And so there's this movement towards opposites, which is it's a seeking of balance. And so that's why, one of the reasons why all personality types, not just the 5, move towards opposite personality types. Yeah. They don't necessarily find balance by doing that. Often it's like an overcorrection. When you steer one way and then you steer the other way in a car, as an overcorrection. You're trying to go straight, but you're not going straight. You're just doing that sort of curved motion of overcorrecting, where it's one imbalance to another imbalance. That's probably more likely what actually happens. But it's an attempt to become more balanced, and it's not necessarily like that's what's happening. That's what they're doing. They're not necessarily thinking to themselves, "Oh, I need to be more balanced." Sometimes they are. It's often about bounded rationality, in that if someone is slanted in one particular direction, they are slanted that way because they only see that option or the opposite of that option. Because we can often see, it's easy to see the opposites. It's like if you take a stance, you take it against something because you see the opposite of it. Two sides of the coins, but it's behavior that's totally outside of the box in terms of their own perception. There's all types of perception that they can't see. So as a person with a personality, all personalities, they conceive of the opposites as they can see it, they can behave like that. And for example, if someone was really angry, they might realize, oh no, I've gone over the top, and they might start talking really softly and overly polite. That often happens. Like, you see people do that because they're trying to make up with this overly nice behavior for this overly aggressive behavior. Yeah, and so we do that at all points of personality, in all different ways in our behavior, and that leads a person to these other personality characteristics from these other types. And so the reason why it's not just a simple opposite, like one type moves to another type, there's two lines of internal connection. That is about the fact that there isn't a plain simple opposite normally. But when it comes to emotions, it's not just like black and white. That's the opposite. There you go. I think I had some examples written down just to sort of explain this a bit better. So yeah, like let's say bored as an emotion. What is the opposite of bored? It's not as simple as there's one direct opposite. Is it excited? Is it interested? Is it fascinated? They're all kind of related, but what about relaxed? Is relaxed the opposite of bored? Can relaxed be the opposite of bored? Maybe, I could see that. Someone would be like, you look bored, and they'd be like, no, I'm relaxed. I could see that happening. So in that sense, in that sentence, it becomes the opposite. Relaxed is used as an opposite. It's like, no, I'm not bored, I'm relaxed. Well, it's at least an alternative, right? If it's not an opposite. But in some ways, you could say that relaxed and bored could be used as synonyms, like they're the same emotion. So like emotions don't always have a easy to point at opposite. It's not as simple as that. But there's kind of opposites, right? And there's places, there's emotional places, there's groupings of emotions. And because of that, there is these two internal lines of connection. And don't get me wrong, every type is actually connected to every other Enneagram type. That's why it's a circle. But these internal lines of connection are it's like the funnel, which it's quite easily for one type to go down, to go in a direction towards. Yeah. Anyway, I think that's about it. It's the 21st of April 2025. Thank you.